It was the encounter of new arts and literature. It was the exchange of cultures from around the world. It was the beginning of a new era, forever changing society's outlook on Black ethnology. It was the Harlem Renaissance. In the early 20th century, many African Americans strived to escape harsh racism in the South as Congress started to enforce the Jim Crow laws. Southern blacks were forced to make their living in the sharecropping system, which offered very little economically. Fortunately, as World War I broke out in Europe, the amount of immigrants entering the North decreased significantly. Recruiters encouraged African Americans to settle north in order to fill these spots. Widely read Black newspapers published advertisements touting the many opportunities for success. Almost 6 million African Americans left home to pursue their new life. Very few African Americans had access to automobiles, so most families traveled by train, boat, or even horse-drawn carts. This was known as the Great Migration. Areas such as Chicago, Detroit, and Pittsburgh watched their Black population increase as families quickly filled the towns. Harlem specifically was home to many open theaters and studios, drawing in plenty of Black writers, artists, musicians, photographers, and poets. Black newspapers and magazines flourished at that time, drawing attention from people around the country. Harlem quickly became a cultural paradise, the center of Black arts and expression.
Well, Renaissance, the word Renaissance means rebirth, and it was really a time of cultural rebirth in the inner city of Harlem, New York.
As the attention increased, African Americans were released from the influence of mainstream white society. They finally had reached an environment where Black history was cherished and they could express themselves without limitations. Many racial walls suddenly broke down as unknown talents had finally been exposed to the public. White establishments were astonished with the work of African American literature and started to rapidly publish Harlem stories and articles. These industries specifically sought out Black writers only to support readers' fascination in the exotic world of Harlem. Black authors and poets felt as though this new era would be the perfect time to address the struggles of ghetto life and segregation. They instantly became the face of Black culture and spoke out for the whole community. Though these authors and poets all shared the same goal, they expressed the topic with many different styles of writing. For example, Claude McKay, award-winning author of Home to Harlem, made use of sonnets to attack the issue of racial violence. Artists managed to fit their own experiences with racism into a visual space. One very important figure was Jacob Lawrence. His 1941 pieces and the Migration of the Negro series highlights abuse migrants had suffered on their way to the North. While authors and artists took the philosophical standpoint, musicians focused on expressing the liveliness of their vivid culture. Jazz was originally created in New Orleans during the early 1900s. When African American musicians moved from Louisiana to Harlem during the Great Migration, jazz spread through the town like wildfire. Everyone was easily captivated by the Black roots within the songs, from improvisation inspired by the work songs of slaves to rhythm retention from sub-Saharan traditions. Jazz quickly began to take over America. As a turning point in history, Duke Ellington accepted an offer to play at Harlem's famous show club, the Whites Only Cotton Club. Ellington's music was broadcast live over the radio, and his first song got so popular that his band eventually became regulars at the Cotton Club. This small privilege provided a ray of hope for aspiring Black musicians around the nation. From then on, white clubs searched for Black performers to fulfill the audience's demands. The tables began to turn. Blacks had come from a past filled with serving whites who were believed to be the superior race. Now, white club owners were willing to provide Blacks with a steady profit. With this huge gain of confidence and success in the Black history, there had to be a downside. Critics saw this era as a fracture in the legacy of Black culture. Even African Americans living outside of Harlem revealed they felt disappointed with the priorities of their own racial community. Revolutionaries of the Harlem Renaissance were accused of tailoring their work to appeal to white audiences. The influence of white customs caused a distinct separation from blacks who wished to stay with their African roots. Some even believe that the Harlem Renaissance helped fuel racism towards Southern African Americans. As performers mimicked white culture, they reinforced the idea that those who were not part of the Renaissance were inferior. This era was not only a breakthrough of black freedom of expression, but involved several movements demanding civil and political rights. The respect black citizens had gained throughout the Renaissance was barely enough to make a dent in breaking down the Jim Crow laws. As African Americans observed whites paying to see their work, they gained a sense of pride. All of Harlem asked the same question: if whites value our talents, why are basic rights too much to ask for?
We are going to maintain segregated schools.
New Negro became the term implying an advocacy of dignity. Black writers, poets, and artists used their popularity in white print houses to address nationwide racial issues. Rather than writing about past experiences, Harlemites began to directly attack the U.S. Congress. The well-known black magazine, The Crisis, held hundreds of angry articles and illustrations depicting racial inequality. Robert Edmonds' Soldiers, the cover of a 1918 The Crisis magazine, raised awareness for the deplorable treatment in black training camps during World War I. Many articles such as Investigation of a Lynching informed readers about the series of black lynchings throughout the 1920s. Through the media, authors and artists around Harlem could motivate the public to participate in this movement.
There were a few stores here in Washington, D.C. that were in African American neighborhoods around U Street that employed only white employees. But the New Negro Alliance started a campaign that said, no, don't shop where you can't work unless they change the policies. I believe there were some court cases, and the courts sided with the New Negro Alliance. The owners of these businesses didn't want these protests in front of their stores.
Harlem was not the only thriving city during the 1920s. All of America, as well as Canada and Western Europe, had experienced an era filled with social, economical, and cultural prosperity. With the rise of the stock market, the United States had become the richest country in the world. Stock prices soared in 1928. However, by September and October of 1929, an upcoming crash was suspected by the media. Ominous signs of trouble exposed the stock market's weak system. Finally, on October 28th, or Black Monday, stock prices plummeted and there was no way of saving it. Investors were in panic. They had to sell their stocks now before they lost everything. Since everyone was selling without any buyers, thousands of families remained in debt. Thus began the Great Depression. The Harlem Renaissance no longer had an audience or customers for their work, as no one had enough money to spend on entertainment. By 1931, 6 million Americans were unemployed, and what used to be a vivid city of Harlem was now the same as all the rest. Though the Harlem Renaissance had faded away in time, its exchange and acceptance of black arts will always remain an impact on our world today. The Harlem Renaissance not only ignited a passion for the arts and black culture, but showed the world that freedom of expression is a right that all races deserve equally. Black music and culture kept expanding after the Harlem Renaissance. In the 1970s and 1980s, black artists such as Barry White, Marvin Gaye, and the Jackson 5 became mainstream artists by creating soul music about happiness and love. Black music from 1970 to 1980 took a huge leap from soul and R&B to hip-hop and rap. Rap battles became popular and artists started feeling like they could fully express themselves on albums because of the explicit content labeling. Around 1990, NWA's first album, Straight Outta Compton, changed the rap game and showed that hip-hop was a vital genre in America. Nowadays, people work hand in hand to create art, no matter the color of your skin. white U.S. citizens learned to accept and even value the talents of African Americans through arts. This realization has lasted generations, where today the content of the book is what matters, not the color of the author's skin.